In March 2025, with a single order from President Putin, Sino-Russian cooperation on aviation engines come to an abrupt halt. Special titanium alloy parts were blocked at Moscow customs, preventing exports. The joint CR929 wide-body aircraft project, a key collaboration between China and Russia, was completely suspended. Just 3 years ago, the two countries celebrated an unconditional friendship, but today that relationship has soured. Moscow customs halted truckloads of Chinese goods at the border, exposing the growing rifts in the partnership. Amidst the crisis on March 19, US President Donald Trump made a startling revelation during an interview on Fox News, stating that Russia has a lot of land and China doesn't have enough land. Russia has a much smaller population than China. It was always a natural enemy situation. While simple, Trump's words were loaded with meaning. He was essentially warning Putin, you have a large, sparsely populated country and China is crowded with people. If you continue this alliance, it's only a matter of time before China turns its focus on your resources. Yet you are still tying yourself to them. On February 25, during a visit to a high-tech enterprise in Moscow, Putin announced that Russia would sell 2 million tons of aluminium and 100 tons of rare earth elements to the US each year at a 45% discount. Although there was no official recording of the announcement, the news quickly spread. The 2 million tons of aluminium would help the US fill a crucial gap in its military production, which is currently short by 800,000 to 1 million tons. This could drive rapid advancement in military technology, including the development of the F-47 fighter jet and a boost in US military ship production, both at significantly reduced costs. It's clear that Putin's actions are positioning Russia to help the US confront China directly in the Pacific. The situation has taken a more aggressive turn, with the 100 tons of rare earth materials directly striking at the core of the Chinese Communist Party, CCP. With access to rare earths, semiconductor production costs immediately drop, enabling the rapid rollout of fully automated US Industry 4.0 and 5.0 production lines. This could even allow unmanned warfare to be waged along the first island chain with ease. For years, the CCP has used rare earth exports as a leverage point against the United States. Yet, with a swift move, Putin has shattered Beijing's calculations. It is a decisive blow to their strategy. Another unexpected turn of events is the sudden disappearance of China-Russia joint patrols in the Far East. For years, these aerials and maritime patrols were a predictable fixture on the calendar every February and March, but this year, there hasn't been a single trace of them. No announcements, no explanations, just a sudden disappearance. This shift is a clear signal of change. The real trouble may be still to come. Putin and Trump are reportedly making moves on a massive energy deal in the Far East. If the deal goes through, US capital would flood the region with Sakhalin oil being sold directly to the United States. Though geographically close to the US, this oil field is also the primary source for the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline. Russia spent over 20 years negotiating with China to finalize a pipeline in 2022, but now Putin is considering selling oil and gas to the US. This move directly undermines China's interests. Think about the significant investments China has made in the Far East. Design fees for the Moscow-Kazan high-speed rail, upgrades to the power grid in the Amur region and Vladivostok, and port cranes in Vladivostok. China covered the cost of all of this, yet Putin is now turning his back on China and welcoming the US capital. Meanwhile, the CCP seems increasingly eager to distance itself from Russia. China's stance on the Ukraine issue has shifted dramatically. Previously, Beijing remained silent on Ukraine, barely acknowledging the situation. But in March, International Development Cooperation Agency spokesperson Li Ming announced that since the Ukraine crisis began, China has provided 4 batches of humanitarian aid and will support post-war reconstruction. This is a stark departure from the previous neutral position. China's state agency Xinhua News has even reported on the living conditions in Kyiv, calling for respect for Ukraine's territorial integrity. This positioning seems to align more closely with the European Union's stance. In February, when the UN General Assembly voted on a resolution condemning Russia, China abstained, whereas they would typically have supported Russia. It's clear that the rift between China and Russia is widening. Germany's Die Welt newspaper reported that China is secretly negotiating with the EU on peacekeeping forces. One internet user pointed out that if China sends troops, it will completely sever ties with Putin. The drama surrounding this is intensifying. By March, Chinese Premier Li Qiang 2025 government work report included measures to ensure the stability and smooth operations of China-Europe freight trains. This aligns with China Railway Corporation earlier push for the Southern Corridor Plan, bypassing Russia to connect Europe through Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan. Even though this route crosses over a dozen countries, carries high cost, and presents significant risk, it's considered a better alternative to being dependent on Russia. The historical relationship between China and Russia has been fraught with tension. From the Treaty of Aigun to the Beijing Treaty, the Chinese Eastern Railway incident to the Zhenbao Island conflict, a legacy of bloodshed and bitterness have made them natural rivals. Yet, in the complex world of international politics, former enemies have become strategic partners, united in their shared goals of countering Western dominance. Looking back on February 4th, 2022, just before the Beijing Winter Olympics, Xi Jinping and Putin signed a $2 billion energy deal. With this financial support, Putin gained the confidence to act in Ukraine after the Olympics. His plan was a swift 72-hour attack to capture Kyiv and install a puppet government. Xi, on the other hand, anticipated a smaller-scale conflict, securing energy deals and establishing a strategic buffer zone. Both leaders implicitly agreed on short-term cooperation with plans to part ways after achieving their objectives. History has played a cruel trick. What was originally planned as a 72-hour attack has stretched into a 3-year-long war of attrition, with both China and Russia becoming trapped in the conflict. For Xi Jinping, Putin's military gamble has exceeded expectations. Supporting Russia risks sanctions, but distancing from them would mean losing a key anti-US ally. As for Putin, he never anticipated becoming so reliant on China. Beijing controls the money, markets, and technology that Russia desperately needs. In the Far East, China's actions have certainly raised concerns for Putin. In 2023, Chinese companies secured significant deals, including the expansion rights for the port of Vladivostok, timber extraction rights in the Amur region, and a 60% stake in a rare earth mining project in Khabarovsk. While Putin may not express his thoughts publicly, it is likely that he feels frustrated by the growing Chinese influence. Central Asia has become another area of tension. The Economist revealed that in 2024, China invested a staggering $9.7 billion in the 5 Central Asian countries, more than 3 times Russia's total investment. Huawei has deployed 80% of the 5G network, gaining control over vital communication infrastructure in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Also, the China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan Railway, bypassing Russia and connecting directly to Europe, is likely another significant setback to Putin's strategic interests. In September 2023, while Russia was forced on Ukraine, China made a bold move by inviting then Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to Beijing. Not only did China fly Assad in on a special plane, China also pledged $83 billion to rebuild the ports of Aleppo and Tartus, 2 vital Russian assets in the Mediterranean. This is clearly an opportunist move that undermines Russia's position. On the battlefield, Putin has begun to see the CCP's true nature. According to the US Department of Defense, China's support for Russia hasn't come in the form of weapons, but through military technology. While Western media often overlooks this, military experts know that China has provided critical supplies to Russia, including satellite intelligence, communication equipment, aviation engine parts, and drone components. The Financial Times reported that Russia's Mi-17 helicopters were facing severe shortages of parts for the propellers and turboshaft engines, and China quietly filled the gap. However, what China has not provided, ammunition and heavy weapons, has left Putin dissatisfied. In contrast, North Korea's Kim Jong-un has been far more generous, sending 10,000 soldiers and a steady flow of artillery shells. In early 2024, 30% of Russian artillery shells came from North Korea. Energy cooperation, once considered the cornerstone of Sino-Russian relations, has instead become a point of dispute. Bloomberg reported that China demanded a 20 to 35% discount on Russian oil, even though Russia's production costs are already high. This, in essence, amounts to taking advantage of the situation. Additionally, the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, which took 10 years to negotiate, stalled because China insisted on paying 40% less in Europe. This is undoubtedly a major source of frustration for Putin. As Russia faces Western sanctions, it has been forced to turn to China for goods to replace those previously sourced from the West. However, this shift has angered the Russian public. According to a Moscow consumer survey, 73% of consumers complained that Chinese products were expensive and of poor quality. In 2023, a Moscow supermarket even experienced a return wave, with customers bringing back Chinese-made appliances due to poor quality. Russia's car manufacturer Avtovaz also struggle with Chinese parts, which cause frequent production stoppages. What concerns Putin the most is the issue of circumventing sanctions. Although China has repeatedly called for trade to be conducted in local currencies, by early 2024 only 30 to 40% of trade was conducted in local currencies, far from the 60% target. Chinese banks have also been hesitant to engage with Russia, fearing US Treasury sanctions. In 2023, the US sanctioned dozens of Chinese companies involved in trade with Russia. Faced with this pressure, Beijing quickly pulled back from any further deepening of ties with Putin. Putin has come to realize that this strategic partnership is only reliable when it benefits China. In critical moments, China cannot be counted on. This realization came while Trump extended a peace offering. On March 20th, Russian Foreign Ministry Sergei Lavrov declared that Russia will choose its partners based on its own interests. Essentially, this means Russia will align with whoever offers the best deals. Trump's approach to courting Russia mirrors Nixon's opening to China strategy during the Cold War. The core goal is to pull Russia out of China's sphere and isolate Beijing. If this strategy succeeds, it could place unprecedented pressure on China. In February, Secretary of State Marco Rubio secretly met with senior Russian officials in Saudi Arabia. The New York Times reported that the US offered a series of conditions, lifting sanctions in exchange for Russia curbing its military technology exports to China, such as the S-500 missile systems and submarine stealth technology. Seeing the growing US-Russia ties, China acted swiftly to reinforce its alliance with Central Asia and the Middle East, ensuring its oil supply lines remain secure. In February, Kazakhstan's President Tokayev publicly declared that China is the most reliable partner in Central Asia. In response, Putin sent military aid to Turkmenistan at the end of February under the guise of counter-terrorism, really a direct message to Beijing. Central Asia is still Russia's domain. At the same time, Beijing ramped up its southward strategy, strengthening ties with Southeast Asia and South Asia, while exploring alternative economic corridors. In March, China and India held successful trade talks, which some analysts believe was part of a strategy to counter a potential US-Russia-India alliance. One China scholar privately remarked that if the US and Russia reconcile, China will be truly surrounded. We need to prepare. Although Putin appears tough at the negotiating table, his true desire is to rejoin the G8. This became clear from a series of statements made by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in March. At the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, Lavrov said Russia is willing to consider rejoining the international mainstream order as long as the West respects our core interest. While this may sound assertive, it's evident that Putin wants to lift sanctions and return to the global power club. The Washington Post provides an insightful analysis. What Putin fears most isn't losing the war to Ukraine, but being excluded from the global stage. If Trump were to offer the G8 membership as an incentive, Putin would likely jump at the opportunity. Lifting sanctions and restoring Russia's international standing would be incredibly attractive. After 3 years of war in Ukraine, Russia has failed to make significant progress. If NATO steps in, how will Russia respond? Will it rely on China to confront NATO in Europe? That's an unrealistic scenario. The European Union is China's largest trading partner, with trade sets to exceed 900 billion euros this year. For China to align with Russia against Europe would only create unnecessary trouble. With Western sanctions intensifying, no one could withstand the impact. Currently, Trump has been stepping back and offering various gestures of goodwill, but Putin remains cautious, questioning whether America's word can be trusted. If Russia moves closer to the US, will Russia end up empty-handed? Now, the US must work hard to reassure Russia and align it with the West instead of focusing on Europe. Trump has also offered a tempting proposal. Putin, look at China right in front of you. The land north of the Yellow River is exactly what you've been eyeing. Why not seize it? Why bother with Europe? It's a provocative suggestion, but it holds some appeal to Putin. An EU diplomat revealed that Russia has privately communicated through various channels with the G7 saying that if sanctions were eased, Russia will reduce military tech cooperation with China. This suggests Putin might be willing to sell out his ally. For China, Putin's strategic betrayal is a serious concern. If Putin reconciles with NATO, Beijing will face geopolitical isolation. Worse, if Putin exposes their military cooperation to the West, China could face devastating technological sanctions. Critical technologies like aircraft engines and submarine tech could be restricted, further weakening China's military capabilities. For China, supporting an unreliable Russia while antagonizing the EU, its largest trading partner, is a poor strategy. Beijing sees a risk clearly. If NATO and Russia truly clash in Europe, choosing sides will be a lose-lose situation. Supporting Russia would mean angering the West, while abandoning Russia would risk losing a vital partner. The solution is clear. Beijing must keep its options open. One Chinese expert said at an internal meeting that China supported Russia because they thought Russia was reliable, but Moscow could betray China at any moment. Why should we take that risk? This statement highlights a key reality. The honeymoon period between China and Russia is over. Moving forward, it will be all about cold calculations, with neither side offering unconditional loyalty. China's military strength still lags the US, so a direct confrontation is out of the question. Instead, China must focus on stabilizing the situation, securing a ceasefire in Ukraine, and build ties with Europe to prevent too many countries from turning against it. But balancing these interests is tricky. Russia can't be completely abandoned. If it turns hostile, it could stir up trouble on the border. Meanwhile, the US continues to press China relentlessly. Europe is growing closer to China, but remains cautious, waiting to see how the US handles the situation. If the US remains hardline, Europe might align with China. If relations improve, Europe will side with the US. The current standoff persists, with all parties carefully watching each other and reluctant to make a move.